Picture this: you're 8 weeks pregnant, glowing with excitement about starting a family, and you decide to share the wonderful news with your boss. You expect congratulations, maybe some questions about maternity leave, perhaps even a celebration. Instead, you get fired within a week. Now imagine the look on that same boss's face when he discovers that the woman he just discriminated against actually owns his entire company. That's exactly what happened to me, and today I'm going to tell you how one man's illegal decision became the biggest mistake of his professional life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and 6 months ago I was living what I thought was the perfect professional life in downtown Chicago. At 32 years old, I had worked my way up from junior account manager to senior director of client relations at Morrison Digital Solutions, one of the fastest-growing marketing technology companies in the Midwest. Our offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower right in the heart of Chicago's bustling business district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan and the city skyline that never failed to inspire me every morning. Morrison Digital wasn't just any company to me. When I first walked through those doors 4 years earlier, fresh out of Northwestern University with my MBA and drowning in student loans, I saw it as my chance to prove myself in Chicago's competitive tech scene. The company specialized in helping Fortune 500 clients navigate the complex world of digital transformation, and I quickly discovered I had a natural talent for building relationships with high-stakes executives who were used to getting their way. Within my first year, I had not only met my quotas but exceeded them by 40%, earning me recognition as the rising star of the client relations department. What made Morrison Digital special wasn't just the cutting-edge work we did or the impressive client roster that included major players like Henderson Technologies, Midwest Financial Group, and Chicago Metro Healthcare. It was the culture we had built together. When I started, the client relations team consisted of just 3 people working out of a cramped office space with mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that broke down every other week. I watched this company grow from a scrappy startup with big dreams into a sophisticated operation employing over 60 people across multiple departments. During those 4 transformative years, I had poured my heart and soul into building something meaningful. 60-hour work weeks became my normal routine, and I genuinely didn't mind because I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. I had canceled family vacations to handle client emergencies, worked through weekends to prepare crucial presentations, and even postponed my wedding to Jake by 6 months because we were in the middle of negotiating what would become our largest contract to date. Jake Martinez had been incredibly patient with my demanding schedule. We had met at a Northwestern alumni networking event 3 years earlier, and he understood the pressure I felt to establish myself in such a competitive industry. As a software engineer at a different tech company across town, he knew firsthand how consuming these career-building years could be. He supported my ambitions even when it meant eating dinner alone most nights or attending social events without me because I was traveling to client sites or working late on proposals. The client relationships I had cultivated over these years were more than just professional connection. I had earned the trust and respect of executives who were notoriously difficult to please. When Sandra Chen at Henderson Technologies needed someone to understand her company's complex integration challenges, she called me direct. When Robert Walsh at Midwest Financial had concerns about data security protocols, he wouldn't discuss them with anyone except me. These weren't just business relationships built on contracts and quarterly reports. They were partnerships founded on mutual respect, shared goals, and the kind of trust that takes years to develop and can be destroyed in a single conversation. By my 4th year at Morrison Digital, I had become the unofficial face of our client relations department. New employees would come to me for mentorship and guidance. Junior account managers would shadow me during client meetings to learn how to navigate complicated negotiations. Even executives from other departments would seek my input when they were developing new service offerings, knowing that I had the deepest understanding of what our clients actually needed and valued. The company's growth during my tenure wasn't coincidental. When I started, our annual revenue was hovering around $8 million. By last year, we had crossed the $25 million threshold, with my department contributing nearly 60% of that growth. The promotion to senior director had come with significant salary increases, stock options that I was told would be valuable if the company ever went public, and the kind of respect within the organization that I had worked so hard to earn. But there was something about my relationship with Morrison Digital that went deeper than even my colleagues knew. Something that made every late night, every missed dinner with Jake, every sacrificed weekend, feel like an investment in my own future rather than just dedication to someone else's company. It was a secret I had kept carefully guarded for 5 years, known only to my attorney and my husband. A secret that would soon become the most important card in a game I never wanted to play. The morning of what would become the most significant day of my professional life started like any other Tuesday in downtown Chicago. I arrived at the office at 7:30, 30 minutes before most of my team, carrying a large coffee from the Starbucks on the ground floor of our building, and feeling energized about the day ahead. We were expecting final signatures on the Henderson Technologies contract, a deal that had taken 6 months of careful negotiation and represented the largest single client agreement in Morrison Digital's history. The Henderson deal wasn't just big in terms of revenue, though the $2.8 million value certainly made it significant. What made this contract truly special was what it represented for our company's future. Henderson Technologies was expanding their operations into European markets, and they had chosen Morrison Digital to serve as their primary digital marketing partner for the entire expansion. Success with this project would position us as serious players in the international market and open doors to similar opportunities with other multinational corporations. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, coordinating with legal teams, technical specialists, and executive stakeholders on both sides. The contract negotiations had been intense, with multiple rounds of revisions addressing everything from service-level agreements to intellectual property protection. There had been moments when I wasn't sure we would be able to meet all of Henderson's requirements while maintaining the profit margins our own company needed. But somehow we had found solutions that satisfied everyone involved. As I settled into my office that morning, reviewing the final contract documents one more time before the signing ceremony, I felt the kind of professional satisfaction that made all the hard work worthwhile. This wasn't just another deal closed. This was validation of everything I had been building at Morrison Digital. It was proof that the relationships I had invested in, the expertise I had developed, and the reputation I had earned were generating real value for the company and advancing my own career in meaningful way. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock in our largest conference room. We had invited key stakeholders from both companies, including Michael Thompson, our CEO, who rarely participated in individual client meetings, but wanted to be present for such a significant milestone. The conference room had been prepared with our best presentation materials, catered refreshments, and the kind of attention to detail that demonstrated how seriously we took this partnership. When Sandra Chen arrived with her team from Henderson Technologies, I felt a surge of confidence that everything was going to proceed smoothly. Sandra and I had developed an excellent working relationship over the months of negotiations, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to achieving results that would benefit both organizations. She had specifically requested that I be designated as the primary point of contact for the ongoing relationship, which was both flattering and affirming of the trust we had established. The actual contract signing proceeded without complication. Legal representatives from both sides confirmed that all requirements had been met. Executives exchanged pleasantries about future collaboration opportunities, and photographs were taken to commemorate the milestone. Michael Thompson gave a brief speech about Morrison Digital's commitment to innovation and client success, while Sandra Chen spoke about Henderson's confidence in our ability to support their international expansion goal. As the Henderson team prepared to leave, Sandra pulled me aside for a private conversation. She thanked me for my dedication throughout the negotiation process, and mentioned that she had already spoken with colleagues at other companies about the exceptional service she had received from Morrison Digital. The prospect of referrals from such a respected industry leader was almost as exciting as the contract we had just signed. Walking back to my office after the ceremony, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond professional pride. This success represented years of relationship building, skill development, and strategic thinking coming together in exactly the way I had hoped when I first joined Morrison Digital. The commission from this deal alone would help Jake and I finally move forward with some of the personal goals we had been postponing, including buying our first house and starting the family we had been discussing for the past year. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a blur of congratulatory messages from colleagues, follow-up calls with clients, and planning meetings for the Henderson project implementation. Michael Thompson stopped by my office in the late afternoon to personally thank me for my work on the deal, and we discussed the potential for similar opportunities with other clients in Henderson's network. For the first time in months, I left the office at a reasonable hour, excited to share the news with Jake and celebrate this professional milestone. Over dinner at our favorite restaurant in Lincoln Park, Jake and I talked about what this success might mean for our future. The Henderson contract would likely lead to additional opportunities and potentially another promotion within the next year. We began making tentative plans for house hunting, discussing neighborhoods we liked and the kind of space we wanted for the family we were hoping to start soon. That evening, as we walked along the lakefront path hand in hand, I felt like everything in my life was finally coming together exactly as I had hoped. My career was thriving, my relationship with Jake was stronger than ever, and we were ready to take the next steps toward building the life we had been dreaming about. I had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, everything I thought I knew about my professional life would be turned completely upside down. The conversation that would change everything happened 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon when I had finally worked up the courage to share some personal news that Jake and I had been keeping private for the past few weeks. At 8 weeks pregnant, we had passed the point where we felt comfortable beginning to share our excitement with family and close friends. I had already told my parents and my sister, and Jake had shared the news with his family the previous weekend. Now it was time to have the conversation I had been both anticipating and dreading with my boss. Michael Thompson had been the CEO of Morrison Digital since its founding 6 years earlier. He was 45 years old, had previously worked at several larger marketing agencies in Chicago, and had started Morrison Digital with the goal of building a more agile and innovative alternative to the traditional advertising agencies that dominated the market. In many ways, he had succeeded in creating exactly the kind of company he had envisioned, but his management style could be challenging in ways that weren't always immediately apparent. During my 4 years at Morrison Digital, my relationship with Michael had been professional and generally positive. He had supported my promotions, approved my request for additional team members, and frequently praised my work in company meetings and client presentations.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
However, I had noticed that he seemed to have different expectations for male and female employees, particularly when it came to issues related to work-life balance and family responsibility. I had observed over the years that Michael tended to assume that women with families would be less committed to their careers, even when their performance indicated otherwise. When Janet Walsh from our marketing department had her first child 2 years earlier, Michael had seemed surprised when she returned from maternity leave, eager to take on additional responsibility. When Lisa Park from our technical team had gotten engaged, he had made comments about how marriage might affect her availability for travel assignments, despite the fact that her fiancé was also in tech and understood the demands of the industry. Despite these concerning patterns, I had convinced myself that my situation would be different. My track record at Morrison Digital was exceptional, and I had just delivered the biggest client win in company history. I had earned Michael's respect through years of consistent performance, and I believed that would count for something when I shared my pregnancy news. I was wrong. That Friday afternoon, I knocked on Michael's office door with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that I hadn't felt since my first job interview. His corner office was impressive, with mahogany furniture, awards covering one wall, and those stunning lake views that reminded everyone of Morrison Digital's success. Michael was reviewing quarterly reports when I entered, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied spreadsheets filled with revenue projections and growth metrics. "Emma, perfect timing," he said, looking up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "I was just reviewing the numbers from the Henderson deal. The board is thrilled with the revenue impact, and I've been thinking about how we can leverage this success for future opportunity." He gestured for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, the same chairs where we had discussed my promotions, salary increases, and strategic planning sessions over the year. I settled into the familiar chair, trying to find the right words to transition from business discussion to personal news. The office felt different somehow, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. Maybe it was my own heightened awareness of how this conversation might shift the dynamic between us. Or perhaps it was the weight of the secret I had been carrying for weeks that was finally ready to be shared. Michael, before we dive into strategy planning, I have some personal news that I wanted to share with you directly, I began, feeling my heart rate increase despite my efforts to stay calm. Jake and I have been keeping this private while we processed everything, but we're expecting our first child. I'm about 8 weeks along, and we're absolutely thrilled about starting our family. The change in Michael's expression was immediate and unmistakable. The smile that had been there moments earlier vanished completely, replaced by what I can only describe as a look of disappointment, mixed with something that felt almost like betrayal. He removed his reading glasses slowly, set them down on his desk with deliberate precision, and leaned back in his chair as if he needed to create physical distance between us. "Emma," he said after a pause that stretched uncomfortably long, "this is certainly unexpected news." His voice had taken on a formal tone that I had rarely heard him use with me before, the warmth and collegiality that typically characterized our interactions, replaced by something much cooler and more distant. "I have to ask, how long have you known about this situation?" The word situation hit me like a physical blow. Not pregnancy, not wonderful news, not even development. Situation. As if my growing family was a problem to be managed rather than a joyful milestone to be celebrated. I felt the first flutter of unease, though I tried to maintain my composure and give him the benefit of the doubt. "We've known for about 3 weeks, I replied, choosing my words carefully. "We wanted to wait until we felt comfortable sharing the news more broadly, and I thought it was important that you hear it from me directly rather than through office gossip or speculation." I had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, anticipating questions about timing, maternity leave policies, and transition planning, but I hadn't prepared for this chilly reception. Michael nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm that suggested deep thought or growing irritation. "I appreciate you telling me directly, Emma, but I have to be honest with you. This raises some serious concerns about your commitment to the company and your ability to handle the responsibilities that come with your position." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I felt my carefully prepared responses dissolving as I tried to process what he was actually saying. This wasn't a conversation about maternity leave policies or project transition planning. This wasn't a discussion about how to maintain client relationships during my time away. This was Michael questioning whether I could continue to do my job effectively simply because I was going to become a mother. "Michael, I'm not sure I understand," I said, working to keep my voice steady despite the growing alarm I felt. "My pregnancy doesn't change my ability to perform my current responsibilities. I'm planning to work right up until my delivery date, and I've already started thinking about how to ensure smooth transitions for my key accounts during maternity leave." He shook his head, and I could see something in his eyes that I had never seen directed toward me before. It wasn't just concern or disappointment, it was dismissal, as if he had already decided that the woman sitting across from his desk was no longer the same valuable employee who had closed the Henderson deal just days earlier. "Emma, let's be realistic here," he said, his tone becoming more condescending with each word. "Having a baby changes everything. Your priorities will shift, your availability will be limited, and your focus will be divided between work and family responsibilities. I've seen this happen before with other female employees, and it never ends well for their career progression." I felt a flush of anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to remain professional. This conversation was veering into territory that felt both personally hurtful and potentially illegal, but I needed to understand exactly what Michael was thinking before I decided how to respond. "Michael, I've been with this company for 4 years, and my performance has been consistently exceptional," I said, my voice gaining strength as I found my footing in what was becoming an argument rather than a conversation. "I've exceeded every goal you've set for me, built relationships with our most important clients, and just delivered the largest contract in company history. Nothing about my pregnancy changes my professional capabilities or my commitment to excellence." Michael leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious and somehow more threatening. "Emma, I'm not questioning your past performance. I'm concerned about your future reliability. Client relationships require constant attention, travel, late nights, weekend work when necessary. How exactly do you plan to maintain that level of dedication when you're dealing with morning sickness, doctor appointments, and eventually sleepless nights with a newborn? The conversation had crossed a line that I never expected it would cross. Michael wasn't just expressing concerns about business continuity or project management. He was making assumptions about my capabilities based entirely on my pregnancy, and he was doing so in a way that felt both discriminatory and deeply personal. "I think you're making a lot of assumptions about how my pregnancy will affect my work," I replied, my professional training warring with my growing anger. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my health needs while maintaining my professional responsibility, and when the time comes for maternity leave, I'll work with you to ensure that all client relationships are properly maintained during my absence." Michael stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline as if the conversation we were having was causing him physical discomfort. When he turned back to face me, his expression had hardened into something I had never seen before in all our years of working together. "Emma, I think we need to have a broader conversation about your role here at Morrison Digital and whether it makes sense for you to continue in your current position," he said, his words carrying implications that made my stomach drop. "This company is at a critical growth phase, and we need people who can be fully committed to pushing us to the next level. I'm not sure that's possible for someone in your situation." The weight of what he was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. After 4 years of building this department, establishing these client relationships, and proving my value to the company over and over again, Michael was questioning whether I belonged here simply because I was pregnant. The unfairness of it was staggering, but even more shocking was the casual way he was discussing what amounted to pregnancy discrimination. "Michael, I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting," I said, my voice now carrying a warning tone that I had never used with him before. "My pregnancy is not grounds for questioning my employment or changing my role within the company. That would be illegal discrimination, and I'm sure that's not what you intend." He returned to his desk and sat down, his movements deliberate and somehow ominous. "Emma, I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm making practical business decisions based on the reality of our situation. If you can't handle the demands of your position, then we need to discuss alternatives that work better for everyone involved." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, each exchange making it clearer that Michael had already made up his mind about my future at Morrison Digital. He questioned my availability for client travel, my ability to work late when necessary, and my commitment to the aggressive growth targets he had planned for the coming year. Every response I gave seemed to further convince him that my pregnancy made me unsuitable for my current role. As I finally left his office that afternoon, I felt emotionally drained and professionally devastated. The excitement I had felt about sharing my pregnancy news had been completely destroyed, replaced by a combination of anger, hurt, and growing concern about my future at the company I had helped build. I walked back to my office in a daze, trying to process what had just happened and figure out how to move forward. The weekend that followed was one of the most difficult I had experienced in years. Jake was furious when I told him about the conversation, and he immediately wanted to contact employment lawyers and file complaints with human resources. I was more hesitant, hoping that Michael might reconsider his position once he had time to think about the conversation more rationally. I had invested so much in my career at Morrison Digital that I wasn't ready to accept that it might be ending simply because I was starting a family. Monday morning brought a continuation of the hostile environment that had begun in Michael's office. I arrived at work to find that I had been excluded from the Henderson Technologies kickoff meeting that I had been scheduled to lead. When I asked Michael's assistant about the change, she told me that the meeting had been reassigned to David Kim from our business development team. David was talented and capable, but he had no previous relationship with Henderson, and no background on the complex negotiations that had led to the contract. Throughout that week, I watched as my responsibilities were gradually transferred to other team members without explanation or discussion. Client calls that I had been managing for months were suddenly being handled by colleagues who had to be brought up to speed on complicated relationship dynamics and project history. The Henderson implementation,
which should have been my priority project, was taken over by a team that didn't include me in any meaningful capacity. The exclusion was both professional and personal. I was no longer invited to strategic planning meetings, where major client decisions were being made. My input was no longer sought on proposals and presentations that I had previously been responsible for developing. Colleagues who had always come to me for advice and guidance were now being directed to work with other senior staff members instead. By Thursday of that week, the pattern was unmistakable. Michael was systematically removing me from my responsibilities and isolating me within the organization. When I tried to address the situation directly with him, he claimed that he was simply redistributing workload to ensure better coverage, and suggested that I should appreciate having less pressure during my pregnancy. The most painful part of this experience was watching relationships that I had spent years building begin to deteriorate through neglect and confusion. Sandra Chen from Henderson Technologies called me directly on Wednesday to ask why she was suddenly working with people she had never met before, and I had to find a way to explain the situation without revealing the discrimination I was experiencing. Other clients began expressing similar concerns, and I could see the trust and confidence I had worked so hard to establish beginning to erode. Friday morning brought the conversation I had been dreading but somehow knew was inevitable. Michael's assistant called to schedule a meeting with Human Resources for that afternoon, and I knew that whatever was coming would be the final chapter in my time at Morrison Digital. I spent the morning preparing for what I assumed would be either a formal disciplinary action or an outright termination, though I couldn't understand how either could be legally justified, given my performance record and the circumstance. Lisa Chen, our Director of Human Resources, was waiting for me in the small conference room adjacent to her office when I arrived for the meeting. Lisa was about my age, had joined Morrison Digital around the same time I did, and had always been professional and fair in our interaction. However, as I took a seat across from her, I could see the discomfort in her expression that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Emma, thank you for coming in," Lisa began, her voice carrying a formal tone that was different from our usual interaction. "I need to discuss some changes to your employment status that have been approved by executive leadership." She had a folder in front of her containing what I assumed were termination documents, and her reluctance to make eye contact suggested that she was as uncomfortable with this situation as I was. "Lisa, before we begin, I want to make sure you're aware of the circumstances that led to this meeting," I said, deciding that I needed to be completely direct about what had been happening. "Michael has been systematically removing my responsibilities and excluding me from my normal duties ever since I told him that I'm pregnant. This feels like retaliation for sharing personal news that should have no bearing on my professional performance." Lisa nodded slowly, and I could see that she was aware of at least some of what had been happening. "Emma, I understand your concerns, and I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. However, the company has decided that we need to make some structural changes to the client relations department, and unfortunately that means we'll be eliminating your position."
The words "eliminating your position" hit me like a punch to the stomach, even though I had been expecting them. After 4 years of building this department, establishing these relationships, and proving my value over and over again, Morrison Digital was claiming that my role was no longer necessary. The timing, coming just 1 week after I had announced my pregnancy, made the discriminatory nature of the decision obvious to anyone paying attention. "Lisa, you and I both know that my position isn't being eliminated," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and hurt I was feeling. "Someone else will be doing my job, working with my clients, and managing the relationships I've spent years building. This is a termination disguised as a restructuring, and it's happening because I'm pregnant." Lisa looked down at the papers in her folder, clearly struggling with a situation that she knew was both unfair and potentially illegal. "Emma, I understand why you might see it that way, but the decision has been made at the executive level. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package and positive references for future employment opportunities." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Lisa explaining the terms of my termination and me questioning the legal and ethical implications of what was happening. The severance package was indeed generous, equivalent to 6 months of salary plus continued health insurance coverage, but it felt like hush money rather than genuine compensation for my years of service. As I sat in that sterile conference room, listening to Lisa read from corporate scripts about difficult decisions and changing business needs, I felt a strange sense of detachment from the entire situation. Part of me was devastated by the loss of the career I had worked so hard to build, but another part was already thinking about what Michael didn't know, what none of them knew, the secret that would soon turn this entire situation upside down. When I finally left Morrison Digital that Friday afternoon, carrying a box containing 4 years' worth of personal items and professional memories, I felt like I was closing one chapter of my life while preparing to open another that none of them could possibly anticipate. Michael thought he was getting rid of a problem employee who would be distracted by family responsibilities. Lisa thought she was managing a difficult but necessary business decision. Neither of them had any idea that they had just terminated the majority owner of their own company. That evening, as Jake and I sat in our Lincoln Park apartment discussing what had happened and what our next steps should be, I made the phone call that would change everything. David Martinez, my attorney, and the public face of Rodriguez Holdings LLC, listened carefully as I explained the events of the past week and the illegal discrimination I had experienced. "Emma," David said when I finished recounting the details, "I think it's time for Morrison Digital to learn who they've been working for all these years. Are you ready to call an emergency board meeting?" As I looked out at the Chicago skyline from our apartment window, my hand resting on my still flat belly where our child was growing, I felt a sense of determination that I hadn't experienced since my early days at Morrison Digital. Michael had underestimated me in ways that would soon become clear to everyone involved. He thought he was firing a disposable employee, but he had actually just declared war on the person who owned his company. "Yes," I told David, my voice steady and resolute. "Let's show them exactly who they've been messing with." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, exactly 72 hours after my termination from Morrison Digital Solutions. David Martinez had worked through the weekend to ensure that all legal requirements were met for calling the meeting, and according to the company bylaws that Michael Thompson had obviously never bothered to read carefully, majority shareholders could convene emergency sessions with just 24 hours notice to discuss matters of critical importance to the organization. I spent Monday evening in David's downtown law office, reviewing documents, and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important business meeting of my life. David's office occupied the 32nd floor of a prestigious building in Chicago's financial district, with conference rooms that offered commanding views of the city and Lake Michigan. As we spread out contracts, ownership documents, and legal briefs across his mahogany conference table, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that reminded me of the early days when I was first building my career at Morrison Digital. David Martinez had been my attorney for 6 years, ever since I first decided to invest my inheritance from my grandfather in what was then a small but promising marketing technology startup. He was in his early 50s, had built a successful practice specializing in corporate law and venture capital transactions, and had the kind of calm, methodical approach that inspired confidence during high-stakes negotiation. More importantly, he understood the significance of what we were about to reveal to Morrison Digital's leadership team. "Emma, I want to make sure you're fully prepared for what's going to happen tomorrow," David said as we reviewed the agenda for the meeting. "When we walk into that boardroom and reveal your ownership position, everything changes permanently. Michael won't be able to pretend this was about business restructuring anymore, and the other board members will realize they've been complicit in illegal discrimination against their own majority shareholder." The weight of that statement settled over me as I considered the implications of what we were planning. For 5 years, I had maintained my secret ownership of Morrison Digital while building my career within the company, believing that earning my success through merit rather than leveraging my financial position was the right approach. I had wanted to prove that I belonged in senior leadership because of my abilities, not because I happened to own 51% of the company's share. My grandfather, Roberto Rodriguez, had been a successful entrepreneur who built a small empire of grocery stores throughout Chicago's Latino communities during the 90s. When he passed away during my final year of graduate school, he left me an inheritance that was larger than I had ever imagined possible. Instead of using the money for immediate gratification or safe investments, I had decided to look for opportunities in Chicago's emerging technology sector. Morrison Digital Solutions had caught my attention because of its innovative approach to digital marketing and the impressive backgrounds of its founding team. Michael Thompson had previously worked at several established advertising agencies and seemed to understand how technology could transform traditional marketing strategy. The company's early clients were showing strong results, and their revenue growth projections suggested significant potential for expansion. Working through David's law firm, I had structured my investment through Rodriguez Holdings LLC, a private investment company that allowed me to maintain anonymity while participating in Morrison Digital's growth. The terms of the investment gave Rodriguez Holdings majority control of the company in exchange for the capital infusion that Michael needed to expand operations and compete for larger clients. What made the arrangement particularly interesting was that Michael had never insisted on knowing the individual identity behind Rodriguez Holdings. He seemed satisfied working with David as the legal representative, and had never expressed curiosity about meeting the actual investor. This suited my purposes perfectly, allowing me to join Morrison Digital as a regular employee without anyone connecting me to the company's ownership structure. Over the years, I had attended board meetings through David, receiving regular updates on company performance and strategic planning without ever revealing my dual role as employee and owner. The other board members, who were primarily smaller investors and industry advisors, knew me only as the successful client relations director who consistently exceeded performance targets and contributed to the company's growth. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me as we prepared for the next day's meeting. Michael had terminated me for being pregnant, apparently believing that my family responsibilities would make me less valuable to the company. What he didn't realize was that he had just fired the person whose investment had made Morrison Digital's success possible in the first place. David, I keep thinking about all the times Michael talked about the company's investors during staff meetings, I said as we organized the documents we would present the next morning. He would always refer to Rodriguez Holdings as this mysterious but supportive partner who believed in our vision and wanted us to succeed. If only he knew he was talking about the pregnant woman he just fired for being unreliable. David smiled at the irony of the situation, but his expression remained serious as he considered the legal implications of what had happened. Emma, what Michael did isn't just morally wrong or bad business judgment. It's a clear violation of federal employment law, and the fact that he did it to the company's majority shareholder makes it even more problematic. We have grounds for multiple lawsuits, but more importantly, we have the power to remove him from his position entirely. The plan we developed for the board meeting was straightforward but dramatic. David would begin by introducing me as a concerned party who wanted to address issues related to my recent termination. We would present evidence of the discriminatory treatment I had received, including recordings of conversations with Michael that clearly demonstrated his bias against pregnant employees. Then, at the appropriate moment, we would reveal my identity as the majority shareholder and call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Michael's leadership. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Chicago feel alive with possibility. I dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a navy blue suit that projected authority while accommodating my early pregnancy symptoms. As David and I rode the elevator up to Morrison Digital's offices, I felt a strange combination of nervousness and excitement about returning to the building where I had spent so many productive years. The boardroom where the meeting was scheduled looked exactly as I remembered from my previous visits as an employee, with its polished conference table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of downtown Chicago. Michael was already seated at the head of the table when David and I arrived, flanked by the other board members who had been able to attend on short notice. Janet Walsh, one of Morrison Digital's original angel investors, was seated to Michael's right. She was a successful entrepreneur in her own right, having built and sold several technology companies over the past 2 decades. Next to her was Robert Chen, a marketing industry veteran who provided strategic advice to the company. The remaining seats were occupied by David Kim from our business development team and Lisa Parks from Human Resources, both of whom had been invited to provide context about recent organizational changes. Michael's expression when he saw me enter the boardroom was a mixture of surprise, confusion, and what appeared to be annoyance. He clearly hadn't expected me to be involved in an emergency board meeting just 4 days after my termination, and the presence of an attorney suggested that the situation was more serious than he had anticipated. "Michael, thank you for accommodating this emergency meeting on short notice," David began, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table from Morrison Digital Solutions. "I'm David Martinez, representing Rodriguez Holdings LLC, and I've asked Emma Rodriguez to join us today to discuss some serious concerns about recent personnel decisions that could have significant legal and financial implications for the company." The introduction was carefully worded to suggest my connection to Rodriguez Holdings without immediately revealing the full extent of my ownership position. I watched as the other board members exchanged glances, clearly trying to understand why someone who had just been terminated was now participating in a board meeting alongside the company's primary investor representative. Michael leaned forward in his chair, his expression becoming more defensive as he realized that this meeting wasn't going to be the routine administrative discussion he had expected. "I'm not sure why Emma's employment situation would be relevant to a board meeting," he said, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone I had heard during our final conversation the previous week. "Personnel decisions are management responsibilities, and I don't see how they relate to broader company governance issues." David opened his briefcase and removed a folder containing the documentation we had prepared. "Michael, I think you'll find that this particular personnel decision is very much a governance issue, especially given the circumstances surrounding Emma's termination and the legal violations that appear to have occurred." The next 20 minutes felt like a carefully choreographed performance as David presented evidence of the discrimination I had experienced. He played audio recordings from my conversations with Michael, highlighting the moments where pregnancy bias was most obvious. He outlined the systematic removal of my responsibilities following my pregnancy announcement and documented the company's failure to follow proper termination procedure. Janet Walsh looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted, occasionally glancing at Michael with expressions that suggested growing disapproval of his action. Robert Chen took notes throughout David's presentation, his experience with employment law issues apparently helping him understand the severity of what had happened. "Michael, these recordings are deeply troubling," Janet said when David finished his initial presentation. "Are you saying that you terminated Emma because she announced her pregnancy? Because if that's what happened, we're looking at a serious legal liability that could threaten the entire company." Michael's face had grown progressively redder throughout David's presentation, and now he was clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "That's not what happened," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Emma's position was eliminated as part of a broader restructuring initiative. The timing was coincidental, not discriminatory." David reached into his briefcase and removed another set of documents. "Michael, if Emma's position was truly eliminated, then why did you immediately assign her responsibilities to other employees instead of redistributing the workload across the department? And why did you tell several clients that Emma was no longer with the company due to personal reasons rather than explaining that her role had been restructured?" The questions hung in the air as Michael struggled to provide satisfactory answers. It was becoming increasingly clear to everyone in the room that his explanations didn't align with the evidence David was presenting, and that the discrimination case against Morrison Digital was much stronger than anyone had realized. "Furthermore," David continued, "I think the board should be aware that Rodriguez Holdings LLC is prepared to take immediate legal action to protect Emma's rights and recover damages related to this discriminatory termination. As the company's primary investor, Rodriguez Holdings is obviously concerned about legal liabilities that could affect the company's financial stability and growth prospects." This was the moment we had been building toward, the transition from discussing my termination as an isolated personnel issue to revealing its broader implications for the company's ownership and governance. I could see the other board members beginning to understand that this situation was more complicated than they had initially realized. Michael was now leaning back in his chair, his confidence visibly shaken by the legal implications David was outlining. "Look, if there was a misunderstanding about Emma's termination, I'm sure we can work something out," he said, his tone becoming more conciliatory. "Perhaps we can discuss reinstatement or an enhanced severance package that addresses everyone's concern." David smiled slightly, recognizing that Michael was beginning to panic about the legal exposure he had created. "Michael, I appreciate your willingness to discuss resolution options, but I think there's something else the board needs to understand about this situation before we talk about remedy." This was the moment of truth,
the revelation that would transform everything that had happened over the past week from a simple employment dispute into a corporate governance crisis. I felt my heart rate increase as David prepared to reveal the secret I had kept for 5 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I'd like you to meet Emma Rodriguez, the founder and majority shareholder of Rodriguez Holdings LLC, which owns 51% of Morrison Digital Solutions. Emma isn't just a terminated employee seeking legal redress. She's the owner of this company, and she's been working here for the past 4 years while Michael remained completely unaware of her identity." The silence that followed David's announcement was absolute and profound. I watched as the implications of what he had just revealed sank in around the table, transforming confused expressions into looks of shock, disbelief, and in Michael's case, what appeared to be growing horror. Janet Walsh was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, are you saying that you've been Rodriguez Holdings this entire time, that you've been our majority investor while working as an employee?" I nodded slowly, feeling a strange mixture of relief and empowerment as my secret was finally revealed. "That's exactly what I'm saying, Jan. I invested in Morrison Digital 5 years ago because I believed in its potential. And then I joined the company as an employee because I wanted to be part of building something meaningful. I never intended to use my ownership position to advance my career, which is why I kept my identity private and earned my promotions through performance." Michael's face had gone completely pale, and he appeared to be struggling to process what he was hearing. "That's impossible," he said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "Rodriguez Holdings has been represented by David for years. There's no way Emma could have been involved without me knowing about it." David opened another folder and spread ownership documents across the conference table. "Michael, here are the original investment agreements from 2019, all signed by Emma Rodriguez on behalf of Rodriguez Holdings LLC. Here are board meeting minutes, documenting her participation in strategic decisions over the past 5 years. And here are the corporate filings that clearly establish her as the controlling shareholder of this company." As the other board members examined the documents, I could see recognition dawning in their eyes. The successful client relations director they had worked with for years was actually the mysterious investor who had provided the capital that made the company's growth possible. Robert Chen looked up from the documents with an expression of amazement. "Emma, this means that when Michael fired you last week, he was actually terminating the person who owns the majority of the company, is that correct?" "That's exactly correct," I replied, my voice growing stronger as I embraced the power I had kept hidden for so long. "Michael discriminated against me because I'm pregnant, systematically removed my responsibilities, and then terminated my employment without cause. What he didn't realize is that he was doing all of this to the person who ultimately controls this company's future." The meeting continued for another hour as we discussed the implications of my revelation and the legal consequences of Michael's action. It became increasingly clear that his position as CEO was no longer sustainable, both because of the discrimination lawsuit he had created, and because he had irreparably damaged his relationship with the company's majority shareholder. When we finally called for a vote of no confidence in Michael's leadership, the result was unanimous among the board members who weren't directly involved in the discrimination. Even Lisa Parks from Human Resources acknowledged that the company couldn't continue operating under a CEO who had created such significant legal liability through his illegal action. As we left the Morrison Digital offices that afternoon, I felt like I was experiencing a complete transformation of my relationship with the company I had helped build. No longer was I the terminated employee seeking justice for discriminatory treatment. I was the owner of Morrison Digital Solutions, and I was about to take control of my own company, in ways that Michael Thompson had never imagined possible. The weeks following Michael's removal from Morrison Digital Solutions felt like living in a completely different reality than the one I had known for the past 4 years. Walking into the office building each morning, I no longer felt like an employee reporting to work. Instead, I felt like an owner taking control of her investment and ensuring that the company she had helped create would live up to its potential in ways that had been impossible under discriminatory leadership. The transition period was both exhilarating and overwhelming. As the newly revealed majority shareholder, I suddenly found myself responsible for making decisions that would affect not just my own career, but the livelihoods of 63 employees, and the future of relationships with major clients who represented millions of dollars in annual revenue. The weight of that responsibility was something I had never fully appreciated during my years as a department director, when my focus was primarily on my own team and client relationship. My first priority was stabilizing the client relationships that had been disrupted during the chaos of the previous weeks. Sandra Chen from Henderson Technologies had been calling repeatedly, expressing confusion about the sudden changes in her account management team, and concern about whether Morrison Digital could still deliver on the ambitious project timeline we had committed to in our contract. The irony wasn't lost on me that Michael's discriminatory actions had threatened the very deal that had been his proudest achievement just weeks earlier. I scheduled individual meetings with each of our major clients during my first week as acting CEO, a title the board had given me while we conducted a formal search for permanent leadership. The conversations were delicate, requiring me to explain the management changes without revealing the discriminatory circumstances that had precipitated them. Most clients were relieved to learn that I would be directly involved in their accounts again, but several expressed concern about the company's stability and ability to maintain consistent service delivery. "Emma, I have to be honest with you," Sandra said during our meeting at Henderson's downtown Chicago offices. "The past 2 weeks have been confusing and concerning for our entire team. We signed this contract because of our confidence in your capabilities and the relationship we've built over the past year. When you suddenly disappeared from our communications and we were told to work with people we'd never met before, it raised serious questions about whether Morrison Digital was the right partner for our expansion project." These conversations were both professionally challenging and personally validating. Hearing clients articulate the value they placed on the relationships I had built reinforced my conviction that Michael's assumptions about pregnant women being unreliable or uncommitted were not just morally wrong but fundamentally disconnected from business reality. The clients who had worked with me didn't see pregnancy as a liability that would affect my professional capabilities. They saw it as a personal milestone that had no bearing on my ability to deliver results. Internally, the revelation of my ownership had created a complex dynamic among Morrison Digital's employees. Some colleagues seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of working for someone who understood the company's operations from the ground up and had demonstrated commitment to its success through both financial investment and personal dedication. Others appeared uncomfortable with the dramatic shift in power dynamics, particularly those who had been involved in implementing Michael's discriminatory policies during my final weeks as an employee. David Kim, who had been assigned to take over the Henderson account during my absence, approached me during my second week as acting CEO with what appeared to be a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "Emma, I need to apologize for how things were handled with your termination," he said, clearly struggling with the awkwardness of the situation. "I was told that you had requested a reduced workload because of your pregnancy and that reassigning your accounts was what you wanted. I had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes." These conversations helped me understand how Michael had manipulated the situation to make his discriminatory actions appear reasonable to other employees. By suggesting that I had requested reduced responsibilities, rather than acknowledging that he was systematically excluding me from my normal duties, he had created a narrative that protected his reputation while isolating me from potential allies within the organization. Lisa Parks from Human Resources requested a private meeting during my third week in leadership, and her discomfort was immediately apparent as she entered my office, the same office that had belonged to Michael just a month earlier but which I had already begun personalizing with family photos, plants, and the kind of warm touches that reflected my collaborative management style rather than Michael's more authoritarian approach. "Emma, I owe you a significant apology," Lisa began, her voice carrying genuine remorse. "I knew that your termination felt wrong when it was happening, but I allowed myself to be convinced that it was a legitimate business decision rather than trusting my instincts about what was really going on. I should have pushed back harder against Michael's explanations and insisted on more thorough documentation of the reasoning behind letting you go." These conversations were emotionally complex for me, because they revealed how many people within Morrison Digital had harbored doubts about my treatment, but had felt powerless to challenge Michael's authority. The hierarchical culture he had created discouraged questioning executive decisions, even when those decisions appeared to violate company values or legal requirements. As I considered what kind of leader I wanted to be, I realized that changing this dynamic would be essential to preventing similar situations in the future. The legal proceedings related to my discrimination case moved forward in parallel with my new leadership responsibilities, creating an unusual situation where I was simultaneously the plaintiff in an employment lawsuit and the chief executive of the company being sued. David Martinez assured me that this wasn't unprecedented, but it did require careful coordination to ensure that my dual roles didn't create conflicts of interest or procedural complications. Michael had initially attempted to fight both the discrimination charges and his removal from the company, apparently believing that he could convince the board that my pregnancy concerns were legitimate business considerations rather than illegal bias. However, as evidence mounted and the legal costs began accumulating, his position became increasingly untenable. The recordings of our conversations, combined with testimony from colleagues who had witnessed his discriminatory comments, created an overwhelming case that his attorney advised him would be very difficult to defend at trial. The settlement negotiations took place in David's office during a gray February afternoon, with snow falling steadily outside the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Michael sat across the conference table from me, flanked by his legal team, looking dramatically different from the confident CEO who had fired me just 3 months earlier.
The weight of the legal proceedings and the loss of his position had clearly taken a toll, and he appeared to have aged significantly during the intervening weeks. Michael, we're prepared to offer a settlement that resolves all outstanding legal issues while allowing everyone to move forward with dignity, David explained as he outlined the terms we had developed. The agreement included a substantial financial settlement that acknowledged the discrimination I had experienced, a public apology that would be shared with Morrison Digital employees and clients, and a commitment from Michael to complete training on employment law and workplace discrimination issues. More importantly, from my perspective, the settlement included provisions that would strengthen Morrison Digital's policies and procedures around pregnancy discrimination and family-friendly workplace practices. Michael's actions had revealed gaps in our company culture that needed to be addressed systematically, rather than simply punishing the individual who had violated our stated values. During the settlement meeting, Michael finally acknowledged the wrongness of his actions in a way that felt genuine, rather than legally strategic. "Emma, I want you to know that I recognize how badly I handled your pregnancy announcement and the decisions that followed," he said, his voice carrying what seemed like authentic remorse. "I allowed my assumptions about working mothers to cloud my judgment, and I treated you unfairly based on stereotypes that had no basis in your actual performance or commitment to the company." The apology was meaningful to me, both because it represented personal closure and because it demonstrated that even people who engage in discriminatory behavior can sometimes recognize their mistakes and commit to doing better in the future. However, I also understood that changing workplace culture requires more than individual apologies. It requires systematic changes to policies, training, and accountability measures that prevent discrimination from occurring in the first place. As spring arrived in Chicago and my pregnancy progressed into the second trimester, I began implementing the organizational changes that would transform Morrison Digital into the kind of company I had always envisioned it could become. The first priority was developing comprehensive family-friendly policies that went far beyond legal minimums to create genuine support for employees who were starting or expanding their family. Working with our human resources team and external consultants who specialized in workplace equity issues, we developed a parental leave policy that provided 16 weeks of paid time off for birthing parents and 12 weeks for non-birthing parents, with flexible options for extending leave or transitioning back to work gradually. We also established on-site childcare facilities, lactation support rooms, and flexible work arrangements that allowed employees to balance family responsibilities with professional commitment. The financial investment required for these changes was significant, but I viewed it as essential to creating a sustainable competitive advantage in Chicago's competitive technology sector. Companies that support working families tend to have higher employee retention rates, better recruitment outcomes, and stronger overall performance, because they attract and retain talented people who might otherwise be forced to choose between career advancement and family responsibility. The response from Morrison Digital employees was overwhelmingly positive, with several team members expressing gratitude for policies that addressed challenges they had been managing privately for years. Sarah Chen from our marketing department, who had returned from maternity leave 2 years earlier, told me that the new policies would have made an enormous difference during her transition back to work after her daughter was born. Emma, having access to gradual re-entry options and reliable childcare, would have eliminated so much stress during what was already an emotionally complex time, Sarah explained during one of our team meetings. I spent months worrying about whether I was meeting expectations while also struggling with the logistics of pumping breast milk in a supply closet, because we didn't have proper facility. These changes will make Morrison Digital a place where people can thrive professionally without sacrificing their family goals. The client response to our organizational changes was equally positive, with several major accounts expressing appreciation for working with a company that demonstrated commitment to social responsibility and employee welfare. The Henderson Technologies project, which had been jeopardized by the chaos surrounding my termination, not only proceeded successfully but expanded beyond the original scope as Sandra Chen recommended Morrison Digital to colleagues at other companies. By summer, as I entered my third trimester and began preparing for maternity leave myself, Morrison Digital's revenue had increased by 35% compared to the previous year, and our employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. The company was attracting top talent from competitors who couldn't match our compensation packages and workplace culture, and several industry publications had recognized us as one of Chicago's best places to work. The personal transformation I experienced during this period was as significant as the professional changes I implemented at Morrison Digital. Pregnancy had initially felt like a vulnerability that others might use against me, largely because of Michael's discriminatory response to my announcement. However, as I successfully led the company through a period of dramatic growth while managing the physical and emotional challenges of pregnancy, I developed a deeper understanding of my own capabilities and resilience. Jake had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire experience, from the initial discrimination through the legal proceedings and the transition to company leadership. His perspective as a software engineer at a different technology company provided valuable insights about industry trends and competitive dynamics, while his emotional support helped me navigate the stress of managing multiple complex situations simultaneously. Emma, watching you handle everything that's happened over the past year has been amazing, Jake told me one evening as we prepared the nursery in our new house in Lincoln Park. We had been able to purchase our dream home using the financial settlement from the discrimination case combined with dividends from Morrison Digital's improved performance. You turned the worst professional experience of your career into an opportunity to create the kind of company you always wanted to work for, and you did it while growing our daughter and managing more stress than most people experience in a lifetime. The night before I went into labor, I sat in my office at Morrison Digital, looking out at the Chicago skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months earlier, I had been a dedicated employee who believed that hard work and excellent performance would protect me from discrimination and unfair treatment. The pregnancy announcement that I expected would be celebrated had instead revealed the limitations of that assumption and forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about workplace bias and power dynamics. However, Michael's discriminatory actions had also created an opportunity for me to use my secret ownership position in ways I had never anticipated. Rather than simply pursuing legal remedies for the discrimination I experienced, I had been able to transform the entire organization and create lasting changes that would benefit future employees who faced similar challenges. Sofia Rodriguez Martinez was born on a beautiful September morning after a labor that was shorter and less complicated than I had feared. Holding my daughter for the first time, I felt a profound sense of completion that went beyond the joy of becoming a mother. I had successfully protected both my family and my professional legacy, while creating an organization that would support other working parents who faced the challenges of balancing career ambitions with family responsibility. The 16 weeks of maternity leave I took were the first real vacation I had experienced in years, and I used the time to bond with Sophia while also reflecting on the leadership lessons I had learned during the most challenging period of my career. When I returned to Morrison Digital in January, I felt renewed energy for continuing to build the company while also raising my daughter in an environment that celebrated rather than penalized family commitment. The story of my discrimination and subsequent transformation of Morrison Digital had attracted attention from business publications and women's advocacy organizations throughout the Chicago area. I began accepting speaking engagements at conferences and professional development events, sharing my experience as a way to help other women understand their rights and encourage companies to proactively address pregnancy discrimination, rather than waiting for legal consequences to force change. The most important lesson I learned, I would tell audiences at these events, is that discrimination often reveals more about the limitations of discriminatory thinking than about the capabilities of the people being discriminated against. Michael assumed that pregnancy would make me less committed and less capable, but the reality was that becoming a mother motivated me to fight harder for workplace equity and to create an organization that supports all employees in achieving their personal and professional goals. 1 year after Sophia's birth, Morrison Digital was recognized by Chicago Business Journal as the fastest-growing marketing technology company in the region, with revenue that had doubled compared to our performance under Michael's leadership. More importantly to me, we had been certified as a family-friendly workplace by several national organizations, and our employee retention rate was among the highest in the industry. The legal settlement from my discrimination case had been used to establish a scholarship fund for working mothers pursuing advanced degrees in business and technology, ensuring that Michael's discriminatory actions would ultimately contribute to expanding opportunities for women facing similar challenges. The fund provided both financial support and mentorship opportunities, helping recipients develop the skills and confidence needed to advocate for themselves in workplace situations. As I write this story, Sophia is now 18 months old and spends her days in Morrison Digital's on-site childcare facility, where I can visit her during lunch breaks and see firsthand how the policies we implemented are working for other employee families. Watching her play with the children of my colleagues reminds me daily of why the fight against pregnancy discrimination matters not just for individual women, but for the next generation, who will inherit the workplace cultures we create today. Michael Thompson eventually found new employment at a smaller marketing agency, where colleagues report that he has become an advocate for family-friendly workplace policies and regularly speaks about the importance of recognizing unconscious bias in hiring and promotion decisions. While I don't maintain personal contact with him, I'm grateful that his experience led to genuine learning and growth rather than simply resentment about the consequences of his discriminatory action. The broader impact of my story has been gratifying in ways I never anticipated when I first decided to fight back against the discrimination I experienced. Several other companies in Chicago's technology sector have reached out for advice about implementing family-friendly policies, and Morrison Digital has become a case study used in business schools and diversity training programs throughout the region. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm struck by how Michael's attempt to push me out of Morrison Digital for being pregnant ultimately led to me taking control of the company and transforming it into something far better than it had been under his leadership. His discriminatory assumptions about working mothers were not just legally wrong and morally offensive, they were also strategically foolish in ways that cost him everything he had worked to build. The lesson for other women facing pregnancy discrimination is that fighting back is not just about individual justice, but about creating workplaces that support all employees in achieving their full potential. Sometimes that fight requires legal action, sometimes it requires organizational change, and sometimes it requires using whatever power and resources you have available to create the transformation that should have happened voluntarily. For employers, the lesson is that pregnancy discrimination is not just a legal liability, but a strategic mistake that can cost them their most valuable employees and damage their reputation in ways that take years to repair. Companies that embrace family-friendly policies and genuinely support working parents will have competitive advantages in attracting and retaining talent, while those that maintain discriminatory practices will find themselves losing ground to more progressive competitors. Most importantly, my experience taught me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us professionally can become catalysts for creating the changes we most want to see in the world. Michael fired me for being pregnant, never knowing that he was giving me the motivation and opportunity to build the kind of company where no woman would ever face that discrimination again. 3 years have passed since that cold February morning when Michael Thompson thought he was solving a personnel problem by firing a pregnant employee. As I sit in my renovated corner office at Morrison Digital Solutions, watching Sophia play in the company's award-winning childcare center through the window that connects my workspace to the children's area,
I'm amazed by how completely our world has transformed. What began as the most devastating professional betrayal of my life has become the foundation for creating something I never could have imagined during those dark days of discrimination and legal battle. The company that emerged from the ashes of Michael's leadership bears little resemblance to the organization I originally joined as an ambitious junior account manager. Morrison Digital Solutions has grown from a regional marketing firm struggling to compete with established agencies into a nationally recognized leader in family-friendly business practices and innovative client solutions. Our revenue has increased by 400% since I assumed permanent leadership. But more importantly, we've become the kind of workplace that attracts talented professionals who refuse to choose between career success and family fulfillment. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it required confronting uncomfortable truths about corporate culture that extended far beyond Michael's individual prejudices. During my first year as CEO, we conducted comprehensive audits of our hiring practices, promotion criteria, and performance evaluation systems, discovering subtle biases that had been influencing decisions for years without anyone recognizing their discriminatory impact. Women with children were consistently rated lower on leadership potential despite identical performance metrics to their male counterparts. Employees who requested flexible work arrangements were viewed as less committed, regardless of their actual productivity or client satisfaction score. Addressing these systemic issues required more than policy changes. It demanded a fundamental shift in how we defined professional excellence and organizational success. Working with diversity consultants and employee focus groups, we developed new frameworks for evaluating performance that measured results rather than presence, collaboration rather than competition, and long-term relationship building rather than short-term revenue extraction. The process was challenging for some long-time employees who had thrived under the previous system, but it ultimately created opportunities for previously overlooked talent to demonstrate their capability. Sarah Chen, who had struggled with pumping breast milk in supply closets during her first maternity leave, became our Director of Employee Wellness and spearheaded initiatives that transformed Morrison Digital into a model for supporting working parents. Under her leadership, we implemented nursing pods with hospital-grade pumps, flexible scheduling that accommodated school pickup times and pediatric appointments, and emergency backup childcare for situations when regular arrangements fell through. These investments required significant upfront costs, but they paid for themselves through reduced turnover, increased productivity, and enhanced recruitment of top talent. The ripple effects of our family-friendly policies extended throughout Chicago's business community as other companies began competing for employees by improving their own parental support offering. Within 2 years of implementing our comprehensive benefits package, several major corporations had reached out requesting consultation on developing similar programs, creating an unexpected revenue stream that complemented our traditional marketing service. The irony wasn't lost on me that Michael's attempt to eliminate what he saw as a liability had ultimately created a competitive advantage that distinguished Morrison Digital in an increasingly crowded market. Our client relationships evolved in parallel with our internal culture changes, as the authentic values we demonstrated internally began attracting organizations that shared our commitment to social responsibility and employee welfare. Henderson Technologies, which had nearly ended their contract during the chaos of my termination, became one of our strongest advocates and referred multiple Fortune 500 companies that were seeking marketing partners aligned with their diversity and inclusion goals. Sandra Chen, who had expressed such concern about service continuity during the leadership transition, now regularly speaks at industry conferences about the business benefits of working with family-friendly vendors. The legal victory over Michael's discrimination established important precedents that extended beyond our individual case. David Martinez used our settlement as a foundation for additional pregnancy discrimination cases throughout Illinois, helping other women who faced similar retaliation for starting families. The publicity surrounding our story encouraged state legislators to strengthen enforcement mechanisms for employment discrimination laws and provided advocacy organizations with compelling evidence for the business case supporting family-friendly policy. More personally, the experience of fighting back against discrimination while simultaneously growing Morrison Digital and raising Sophia taught me lessons about leadership that no business school curriculum could have provided. Managing a company while navigating pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood required developing time management skills, emotional resilience, and strategic thinking capabilities that enhanced my effectiveness in ways I never anticipated. Rather than making me less capable as Michael had predicted, becoming a mother expanded my perspective on what truly matters in business and helped me build an organization focused on sustainable success rather than short-term profit. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that emerged from our story created platforms for sharing lessons that extended far beyond pregnancy discrimination. Business schools began inviting me to discuss case studies about transforming organizational culture, while women's professional organizations asked me to address conferences about using personal challenges as catalysts for systemic change. These opportunities to influence broader conversations about workplace equity felt like natural extensions of the work we were doing at Morrison Digital, creating impact that reached far beyond our own employees and clients. Jake's perspective on our journey has been invaluable throughout the entire transformation process. As a software engineer with his own demanding career, he understood the professional pressures I was navigating while also providing emotional support during the most stressful periods of legal proceedings and company restructuring. His experience as a working father in our new family-friendly environment gave him insights into the practical benefits of the policies we implemented, and his feedback helped us refine programs to ensure they met the real needs of employee families rather than simply checking compliance boxes. Emma, watching you turn Michael's worst assumptions about working mothers into proof of everything he got wrong has been incredible, Jake told me during Sophia's third birthday party, which we celebrated in Morrison Digital's employee family room, surrounded by colleagues and their children. You didn't just survive pregnancy discrimination, you used it as motivation to create a workplace where no other woman will have to choose between having a baby and advancing her career. The financial success that accompanied our cultural transformation exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Morrison Digital's stock value had increased by 600% since I revealed my ownership and assumed leadership, making my original investment one of the most successful venture capital decisions in Chicago's recent history. The company had grown from 63 employees to over 200, with offices in 3 cities and client relationships spanning multiple industries. The success validated my grandfather's belief in investing in promising opportunities while also proving that family-friendly policies enhanced rather than hindered business performance. Sophia's presence in our daily work environment became a symbol of the changes we had implemented, and a reminder of why those changes mattered. Watching her interact with the children of other employees, seeing her comfort level in a professional setting that welcomed family, and observing how naturally our team members integrated their parental responsibilities with their work commitments, demonstrated the practical benefits of creating truly inclusive workplace. She was growing up in an environment where career success and family devotion were complementary rather than competing priorities. The childcare center we established became a model that other companies throughout the region began replicating, with our Director of Family Services frequently consulting with organizations seeking to implement similar programs. The facility featured age-appropriate learning environments, qualified early childhood educators, and seamless integration with employees' work schedules that allowed parents to participate in their children's daily activities without compromising professional responsibility. The investment in high-quality childcare paid dividends through increased employee retention, reduced stress-related absences, and enhanced recruitment of talented professionals who might otherwise have chosen employers offering similar benefits. As Morrison Digital's reputation as a family-friendly employer spread throughout Chicago's business community, we began attracting applications from executives at competing firms who were seeking environments where they could advance their careers without sacrificing family relationships. These experienced professionals brought valuable skills and client relationships that accelerated our growth while also validating the competitive advantage of our people-first approach to business development. The talent acquisition team reported that our family-friendly policies had become a primary differentiator in negotiations with potential hires, particularly among working parents who had experienced discrimination or lack of support at previous employers. The industry recognition that followed our transformation included awards for workplace innovation, diversity leadership, and business growth that positioned Morrison Digital as a case study for sustainable organizational change. Harvard Business School developed a curriculum module based on our experience, examining how companies can turn crisis situations into opportunities for fundamental improvement. The attention was gratifying, but more importantly, it provided platforms for sharing practical strategies that other organizations could implement to create more equitable and supportive work environment. Michael Thompson's journey since his departure from Morrison Digital has been complex and ultimately redemptive in ways that neither of us could have predicted during the hostile period surrounding my termination. After initially attempting to fight the discrimination charges, he eventually acknowledged the wrongfulness of his actions and committed to learning from the experience rather than simply serving his legal obligation. His new position at a smaller marketing agency included responsibilities for developing diversity and inclusion programs, work that colleagues report he approaches with genuine commitment to preventing other women from experiencing the discrimination he inflicted on me. During a chance encounter at an industry conference 2 years after our legal settlement, Michael approached me with what appeared to be sincere remorse and respect for the changes I had implemented at Morrison Digital. "Emma, I want you to know that losing this company was the best thing that could have happened to me professionally," he said, his tone carrying none of the arrogance or dismissiveness I remembered from our final conversation. "It forced me to confront assumptions I didn't even realize I was making and to understand how much damage those assumptions were causing to talented people who deserved better leadership." The conversation was brief and somewhat awkward, but it provided closure that I hadn't realized I needed. Seeing Michael's genuine recognition of his mistakes and his commitment to doing better in his new role reminded me that workplace discrimination often stems from unconscious bias rather than deliberate malice, and that education and accountability can sometimes lead to meaningful change even among people who initially resist accepting responsibility for their actions. The scholarship fund established with proceeds from our legal settlement has provided educational opportunities for over 50 working mothers pursuing advanced degrees in business and technology fields. Recipients include women who faced pregnancy discrimination at other companies, single mothers seeking career transitions, and professionals who had delayed their education to focus on family responsibility. Each scholarship includes mentorship opportunities that connect recipients with successful women in their chosen fields, creating support networks that extend beyond financial assistance to provide career guidance and advocacy skills. Sophia's development in our family-friendly work environment has been remarkable to observe. At 3 years old, she demonstrates social skills and confidence that I attribute partly to her daily interactions with adults who respect her presence and children from diverse family backgrounds. She understands that work and family can coexist harmoniously rather than competing for attention, and she's growing up with role models who demonstrate various approaches to balancing professional ambitions with parenting responsibility. The environment we created for employee families has given her advantages that extend far beyond the convenience of on-site childcare. The consulting practice that evolved from sharing our organizational transformation experience has become a significant revenue source while also advancing our mission of creating more equitable workplaces throughout the business community.
Morrison Digital's family-friendly business solutions division works with companies across multiple industries to assess their current policies, identify opportunities for improvement, and implement changes that support working parents while enhancing overall business performance. The demand for these services demonstrates growing recognition among business leaders that family-friendly policies represent strategic investments rather than costly accommodations. Our success has also attracted attention from venture capital firms interested in investing in companies that demonstrate strong environmental, social, and governance practices. While Morrison Digital remains privately held under my majority ownership, the investment interest has provided opportunities to expand our operations and develop new service offerings that leverage our reputation for innovation and social responsibility. The financial validation of our approach has been gratifying, but more importantly, it's created resources for continuing to pioneer workplace practices that support employee well-being alongside business growth. The broader impact of our story continues to evolve as other women facing pregnancy discrimination reach out for advice and support. Through speaking engagements, mentorship programs, and advocacy work with employment rights organizations, I've been able to help dozens of women navigate similar challenges while also working to prevent discrimination before it occurs. The most rewarding aspect of this work is seeing how individual success stories can inspire systemic changes that benefit entire communities of working parents. Looking toward the future, Morrison Digital is positioned to continue growing while maintaining the values that emerged from our transformation. We're exploring opportunities to expand our family-friendly business consulting practice nationally, develop innovative childcare solutions that other companies can adopt, and create additional programs that support working parents throughout their career journey. The foundation we built during those difficult months of fighting discrimination has become the platform for impact that extends far beyond our original business objective. The relationship between Sophia and the Morrison Digital community exemplifies the kind of workplace culture I always envisioned but never thought would be possible until Michael's discrimination forced us to rebuild everything from the ground up. Watching her grow up surrounded by professional role models who demonstrate that career success and family devotion can coexist harmoniously gives me confidence that her generation will inherit workplaces far more equitable and supportive than the ones we experience. As I finish writing this reflection on how pregnancy discrimination became the catalyst for creating our dream company, Sophia is napping in the childcare center while I prepare for a board meeting where we'll discuss expansion plans that could double our size within the next 2 years. The contrast between this moment and that devastating conversation in Michael's office 4 years ago illustrates how completely our world has changed. But more importantly, it demonstrates what becomes possible when discrimination is met with determination to create something better, rather than simply seeking individual justice. The lesson I hope other women take from our experience is that fighting back against pregnancy discrimination isn't just about protecting your own rights, but about creating workplaces where future generations of working mothers will never face the choices that previous generations were forced to make between career advancement and family fulfillment. Sometimes that fight requires legal action, sometimes it requires organizational transformation, and sometimes it requires using whatever resources and opportunities you have available to demonstrate that the assumptions underlying discrimination are not just wrong but strategically foolish. For business leaders, our story illustrates that pregnancy discrimination represents far more than a legal liability. It's a strategic mistake that can cost companies their most valuable employees, damage their reputation in competitive talent markets, and prevent them from accessing the innovation and perspective that diverse teams provide. Companies that embrace family-friendly policies gain competitive advantages in recruiting, retention, and performance that more than justify the investments required to create truly supportive work environment. Michael Thompson fired me for being pregnant, never imagining that his discriminatory decision would give me the motivation and opportunity to transform his company into something far better than it had ever been under his leadership. His assumptions about working mothers weren't just legally wrong and morally offensive. They were business mistakes that cost him everything he had worked to build while creating opportunities for the woman he underestimated to prove exactly how wrong he had been. 5 years after Michael Thompson's discriminatory text message changed the trajectory of my life forever, I find myself standing before the Illinois State Legislature as they prepare to vote on the family-forward workplace legislation that would require all companies with more than 50 employees to provide comprehensive parental leave and prohibit pregnancy discrimination with enhanced penalties. The irony of this moment isn't lost on me as I adjust the microphone at the witness table, knowing that the very discrimination I experienced has become the foundation for legal protections that could prevent thousands of other women from facing similar injustice. The legislative hearing room is packed with advocates, business leaders, and working parents who have traveled from across the state to support this groundbreaking legislation. Sophia, now 5 years old and confidently articulating her thoughts about fairness and family, sits in the gallery with Jake, wearing a small button that reads, "My mom built this," that one of our employees designed for her. Her presence here represents everything we've been fighting for since that cold February day when Michael thought he was solving a personnel problem by firing a pregnant woman. Honorable members of the committee, my voice steady with the confidence that comes from years of turning personal adversity into systemic change. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm here to share how pregnancy discrimination nearly destroyed my career, but ultimately led to creating the kind of workplace that benefits family, businesses, and entire communities. The words carry weight that extends far beyond my individual story, representing the experiences of countless women who have faced similar challenges but lacked the resources or opportunities to fight back effectively. The committee members lean forward attentively as I recount the key moments of our journey, from Michael's initial dismissive response to my pregnancy announcement, through the revelation of my ownership position and the transformation of Morrison Digital into a nationally recognized leader in family-friendly business practices. However, today's testimony focuses on the broader implications of our experience and the measurable benefits that result when companies embrace, rather than resist, supporting working parents. The economic data from Morrison Digital's transformation tells a compelling story about the business case for family-friendly policies. I continue referencing the comprehensive analysis we conducted with Northwestern University's business. Since implementing our parental support programs, we've seen employee turnover decrease by 73%, productivity increase by 42%, and revenue grow by over 600%. These aren't just feel-good statistics. They represent real competitive advantages that benefit shareholders, employees, and customers alike. The committee's questions revealed genuine interest in understanding how legislation can encourage voluntary adoption of family-friendly policies, while also providing legal protections for workers who face discrimination. Several members share personal experiences with workplace challenges during pregnancy or early parenthood, demonstrating that these issues affect families across political and economic divides. The bipartisan support for the legislation reflects growing recognition that supporting working families strengthens entire communities rather than imposing burdens on employers. Following my testimony, I participate in a panel discussion with other business leaders who have implemented innovative approaches to supporting working parents. The conversation reveals common themes about the importance of moving beyond minimum compliance with existing laws toward creating cultures that genuinely value family relationships alongside professional achievement. Companies that have embraced this approach consistently report better recruitment outcomes, higher employee engagement, and stronger financial performance compared to organizations that view family support as a necessary cost rather than a strategic investment. The networking reception after the hearing provides opportunities to connect with legislators, advocates, and business leaders who are working to advance family-friendly policies throughout the Midwest. Many attendees express interest in learning from Morrison Digital's experience and implementing similar programs at their own organizations. These conversations reinforce my conviction that sharing our story widely creates ripple effects that extend far beyond any individual company or industry. During the drive back to Chicago that evening, Jake and I discussed the significance of this legislative milestone and its potential impact on families throughout Illinois. Sophia falls asleep in her car seat, exhausted from the excitement of visiting the state capitol and meeting the lawmakers who will determine whether other children's parents receive the same workplace protections that have allowed our family to thrive. Her peaceful presence reminds us that the changes we've advocated for will shape the working world she inherits as an adult. The Family Forward Workplace Act passes both chambers of the Illinois legislature with overwhelming bipartisan support 6 weeks later, making our state the third in the nation to mandate comprehensive parental leave and strengthen penalties for pregnancy discrimination. The signing ceremony takes place in Governor Patricia Williams' office, surrounded by advocates who have worked tirelessly to advance this legislation, and families whose stories demonstrated the urgent need for stronger legal protection. Governor Williams acknowledges the role that Morrison Digital's experience played in building momentum for the legislation during her remarks at the signing ceremony. Emma Rodriguez and her team didn't just fight back against pregnancy discrimination in their own workplace, she says, holding the pen that will make the new law official. They used their experience to create a model that demonstrates how supporting working families strengthens businesses and communities. This legislation extends those protections to every working parent in Illinois. The media coverage of the law's passage includes extensive discussion of Morrison Digital's transformation and the business benefits we've documented through our family-friendly policy. National business publications feature our story as a case study for how companies can turn compliance requirements into competitive advantages. While parenting magazines highlight our on-site childcare and flexible work arrangements as examples of what becomes possible when employers prioritize family support, the attention creates new opportunities for expanding our consulting practice to help other companies implement similar programs, while also raising awareness about the ongoing challenges that working parents face in less supportive environments. Our team receives inquiries from organizations across multiple industries, seeking guidance on developing policies that comply with the new legislation, while also creating authentic cultures of family support. Sophia's kindergarten graduation ceremony at Morrison Digital's on-site elementary school marks another milestone in our journey toward creating workplaces that support families throughout their development. The school, which we established in partnership with Chicago Public Schools and several other family-friendly employers, provides high-quality education that allows parents to remain involved in their children's daily learning while maintaining demanding professional responsibility. Watching Sophia receive her kindergarten diploma from teachers who know her parents' work schedules and understand our family's values reinforces the importance of creating institutional support for working families rather than expecting individuals to navigate complex challenges without assistance. The integrated approach we've developed addresses practical needs like childcare and education, while also fostering community relationships that benefit children's social and emotional development. The success of our educational partnership has attracted attention from school districts throughout the region that are seeking innovative approaches to serving working families while addressing funding challenges through corporate partnership. Morrison Digital's investment in the on-site school creates tax benefits while also ensuring that our employees have access to exceptional educational opportunities for their children. The model demonstrates how creative collaboration between businesses and public institutions can address community needs more effectively than either sector could achieve independently. The international recognition that followed the passage of Illinois' Family Forward Workplace Act includes invitations to speak at conferences in countries that are developing their own approaches to supporting working parents. These opportunities to share our experience with global audiences reinforce the universal nature of the challenges that working families face, while also highlighting innovative solutions that can be adapted to different cultural and economic contexts. During a speaking engagement at the International Conference on Workplace Equity in London, I meet representatives from companies throughout Europe that are implementing family-friendly policies as part of broader diversity and inclusion initiatives. The conversations reveal common challenges around changing organizational cultures, measuring the impact of new policies, and communicating business benefits to skeptical stakeholders. However, they also demonstrate growing momentum toward recognizing family support as essential to creating sustainable and equitable workplaces. The European perspective on parental leave and family support provides valuable insights that inform continued refinement of our programs at Morrison Digital. Countries with longer histories of comprehensive family policies have developed sophisticated approaches to career continuity during parental leave, gradual return-to-work transitions, and ongoing support for working parents that we incorporate into our evolving practices. These international best practices help us stay at the forefront of family-friendly employment while also sharing American innovations with global colleagues. Sophia's 7th birthday party celebrated in Morrison Digital's expanded family center with children from throughout our employee community represents the culmination of everything we've built since that devastating conversation in Michael's office. The laughter and joy filling the space where I once feared my career was ending demonstrates how completely our world has transformed through determination to create something better rather than simply accepting discriminatory treatment. The children playing together represent families from diverse backgrounds who have found community and support through our workplace culture. Their parents include executives who relocated from other companies seeking family-friendly environments, recent graduates who chose Morrison Digital specifically because of our values, and longtime employees who have grown their families while advancing their careers in ways that wouldn't have been possible under previous leadership. Jake's reflection on our journey during Sophia's birthday celebration captures the personal transformation that accompanied our professional success. Emma, watching you turn the worst experience of your career into the foundation for creating your dream company has been incredible, he says, observing Sophia's confidence as she leads games and activities for her friends. But seeing Sophia grow up in an environment where family and career support each other rather than competing shows me the real impact of everything you've built.
The consulting practice that emerged from sharing our transformation experience has grown into a significant business unit that helps organizations throughout North America implement family-friendly policies while avoiding the legal and cultural pitfalls that can undermine well-intentioned effort. Our team works with companies ranging from small startups to Fortune 500 corporations, adapting our core principles to different industries, organizational cultures, and resource constraints. The demand for family-friendly workplace consulting demonstrates growing recognition among business leaders that supporting working parents represents a strategic imperative rather than a compliance requirement. Companies that fail to provide adequate family support increasingly struggle to attract and retain top talent, particularly among younger professionals who prioritize work-life integration alongside traditional measures of career success. Morrison Digital's reputation as a family-friendly employer has created recruiting advantages that extend far beyond our immediate hiring needs. Top graduates from leading business schools specifically seek opportunities to join our team, viewing our workplace culture as preparation for leadership roles throughout their career. This talent pipeline ensures that our continued growth is supported by professionals who understand and value the principles that guide our operation. The research partnership we established with Northwestern University's Business School has produced peer-reviewed studies documenting the financial benefits of family-friendly workplace policies that are cited by advocates and policymakers throughout the country. The data provides evidence-based support for legislation like Illinois' Family Forward Workplace Act, while also helping other companies build business cases for implementing similar programs. As I prepare for another speaking engagement about transforming workplace discrimination into organizational excellence, I'm struck by how far we've traveled from that devastating text message that could have ended my career. Michael Thompson's attempt to push me out for being pregnant ultimately gave me the opportunity to create the kind of workplace I had always dreamed about, but never thought would be possible within existing corporate structure. The legacy of our transformation extends beyond Morrison Digital's success to influence workplace policies, legislative protections, and cultural attitudes about working families throughout our community and beyond. Sophia is growing up in a world where pregnancy discrimination faces stronger legal consequences, and where family-friendly policies are increasingly recognized as business necessities rather than optional benefit. Looking toward the future, Morrison Digital continues evolving our approach to supporting working families while maintaining the growth and innovation that drive our business success. New challenges emerge as our employee community diversifies and as changing economic conditions create different pressures on working parents, but our foundational commitment to putting families first provides stability and direction for navigating whatever obstacles we encounter. The most important lesson from our experience is that workplace discrimination often reveals opportunities for creating positive change that benefits everyone involved. Michael's pregnancy bias didn't just harm me individually. It prevented Morrison Digital from reaching its full potential by creating environments where talented employees couldn't thrive. Eliminating that discrimination unleashed creativity, productivity, and loyalty that transformed our entire organization. For other women facing pregnancy discrimination, our story demonstrates that fighting back can create lasting change that extends far beyond individual justice. Sometimes that fight requires legal action. Sometimes it requires using whatever power and resources you have available, and sometimes it requires building coalitions with others who share your values. But the effort is worthwhile because workplace discrimination affects entire communities, and defeating it creates benefits that ripple outward in ways you might never anticipate. Michael Thompson fired me for being pregnant, never imagining that his discriminatory decision would motivate me to transform his company into a national model for family-friendly employment. His assumptions about working mothers weren't just wrong. They were strategically foolish mistakes that cost him everything while creating opportunities for the woman he underestimated to build something far better than anything he had ever envisioned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.